Hey, everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jermillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives and the people in my network. These are the great leads that I want to pick their brains on the great books that have impacted their life, influenced their work, their business, whatever it may be, all these worlds that intersect. I want to get to those books that are the nuggets of wisdom that have kind of built the foundation for what they do. And in this series, I cover three categories of books. The first, where they're sharing a book with me that I haven't read myself. Second category, where we're covering the book that we've both read, whether specifically for the series or before in our previous lives. The third category is when I'm lucky enough to talk to authors and or publishers about the books that they're putting out there and the messages that they want to share. In this particular episode, my guest is Carl Grant III, and Carl lives in Austin, Texas, and is the married father of 5 adult children. He is the author of How to Live the Abundant Life, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Carl is the CEO of Capital Raise and Connexa Holdings, LLC, is chairman of CMFI, and is a partner in Superconnector, LLC. Previously, Carl served as global head of business development for Cooley, during which the firm's annual revenue grew from $310 million to over $2 billion. He was the first business development hire at PricewaterhouseCoopers, where he grew revenue 33% in his market. He is the founder of the South by Southwest Sunday Service and the High-Tech Prayer Breakfast, DC Metro, Inc. And Carl heard about the series, what I was doing about books and just my guests and finding out their backstories, the mix of everything that goes into it, reached out. We went back and forth, learned a little bit about each other's experience and background. And here we are for this conversation. Carl, thank you so much for joining me.
John, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I always start off just by, even though I read the bio, just getting a sense for who you are today, Carl. So who are you today in terms of what's the work that you do, the ins and out? What does that look like?
Well, a lot of people define themselves by their career. I am a person of faith first, and a husband and dad second, and then I'm a hard worker after that. And so, in addition to publishing a book, I left the corporate world after 20 years in the same role and started my own consulting company. And so I'm doing consulting work with some law firms. I did some consulting work with an investment bank. I've had a lifelong career in business development in which I was pretty successful. And so there is a demand for firms that have not been as successful to learn from that success and then have me help them implement some of those programs. And so I'm doing that. I'm having a lot of fun doing it. Stood up that Capital Raise software platform with my son, Carl, the fourth. And that's why I use the third, because there's three of us alive, and I wasn't using it until he moved to Austin and went into business with me. Now people send him emails thinking they're emailing me, and so it can be quite confusing.
No, that makes sense.
So, yeah.
So the consulting that you do, Carl, is just strictly business development for these corporations, for these companies. It's across different industries and fields?
It is, but being that I spent so much time in a law firm and had that tremendous revenue growth under my leadership, I get asked by law firms to come in. So I'm doing a lot of work for Morrison & Foerster here in Austin. Great client, having a lot of fun with them. And then I'm going to be teaming up with a former actually boss of mine at Cooley. He was the chief strategy officer, and he stood up a consulting practice, and we're going to team on engagements and actually go in and advise firms on strategy and on reorganizing their marketing and business development operations. So I'm excited about that new chapter coming up soon.
Are there also workshops of sorts, Carl, or is it all consulting?
Well, so that's how I started out. Actually, I built a training program for an investment bank that asked me to come in and train their senior vice presidents. The way it works in an investment bank, you go from senior vice president to director and then managing director. So it seems backwards, but it's not. So I was training their senior vice presidents, and so I built out 4 hours of content, and it's a lot. That's a lot of content to give in one sitting. I like to break it up. I've given it broken up too, and it goes much better because it's really 25 years of a career built into 4 hours. And for somebody who hasn't done business development, and none of it is really anything you can learn in a book. It's stuff that I learned from trial and error. And so it's really rich information with a lot of real life applications and what works and what doesn't work. And so it can be a lot to digest for someone who's new at it. So I like to break it up. And any of your listeners need any of that, it's something I really enjoy doing. I have a lot of fun. Speaking and teaching folks that can learn this stuff and then benefit from it and be more successful by implementing it.
No, absolutely. Anytime I share these episodes, whether the video or the audio, I always include the information provided by my guests, your websites, and on all your background, all your services, whatever you provide. So they'll definitely have access to that.
I just took down the Connexa Partners website because it was getting a little outdated. So I figured I would take it down and rebuild it. So I don't know if that link would help, but certainly they can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's like the perfect hub. Anytime somebody asks for links, it's like, go there. If the person is solid about how they use LinkedIn, they'll include everything that they want you to know, all the websites they want you to use, the contact information. So that will definitely be shared. Carl, when it comes to my guests, I always ask, because I'm built this curiosity. Always had it, but especially in talking to them, I want to get a sense for that path that they've taken. So what did your path look like from your adolescence, when you were taking those first steps, whether into education, straight into the workforce? What did it look like from then to now? Just kind of like an overview, a path that you walked to get to where you are now, even if you didn't know you were going to end up where you are now. What did those first couple steps and then that path look like?
It's interesting because my path changed a bit in graduate school. So I was a very ambitious young man, mainly because my dad instilled that in me. There was no goal that was too high, right? Being president of the United States was not out of your reach if you wanted to set your mind to it. I don't know. Politics is kind of ugly. I don't know that that's necessarily where I want to go.
Hey, listen, just because I don't want to do the job doesn't mean I can't do it. I just choose not to do it. Yeah,
I thought I wanted to do it, but after the Donald Trump Hillary election, the ugliness that was in that campaign, I'm like, you know what? I'm too nice of a guy. I couldn't say mean things like that on both sides, right? And so
absolutely.
So very ambitious. Went to grad school, and
what was undergrad, Carl? I'm sorry.
So I went to Ohio University undergrad. I was born in Ohio. My folks went to Kent State undergrad. Then my dad got his PhD at Ohio State, and so going back to Ohio made sense. And the E.W. Scripps School of Journalism was one of the top schools in journalism. I thought I wanted to go into broadcast journalism. My dad was in that arena, and so I went there. It was a lot of fun. Had a great time there. But then I went to Indiana, Kelley School of Business, for my MBA. And halfway through that program, I really had something happen to me that changed my life a bit. Well, a lot. I was a complete atheist up until the age of 24. And then I became a person of faith. I became a Christian at age 24. And it really was a humbling juncture in my life, because, I realized everything I used to believe was wrong. So now I had a new philosophy on life, and I had to figure out how to put that all together as I finished graduate school. I'm still trying to figure that out, John. But it did change my focus and my interests a bit. And so
Carl, I find if anybody says that they have it all together, that's when I get kind of cautious about who somebody is. So if somebody says they're a work in progress, I'm like, okay, that's what I want to hear. Like, we're moving, we're working. But when somebody says they have it all together, I kind of raise an eyebrow. So I appreciate that.
I love hearing. I don't know if you're a boxing fan. I'm Mike Tyson's back in the scene. Mike Tyson's my age, and to see this guy coming back into the scene is interesting. And he always says, just trying to figure it out. And he's so humble when he talks about that stuff. And I listen to him, and for somebody who's been kind of to the top of the mountain and back, it's interesting. So not that I believe all of Mike Tyson's philosophies. I find him an interesting character. He's an interesting character and an inspiration to guys, about his age. So anyways, so had to figure out how all that fit together. Really tried to start a business with my dad out of grad school. And really that was the point in time where I really realized that I couldn't do it all myself, that I needed to rely on God to guide me through it, And so it was a humbling 4 years because we had so many big deals that were before us. We were launching a cable television network, and we'd have these monster deals that would just fall apart at the last minute. And so I went through 4 years of that, ended up getting married, and my wife got pregnant, and now I needed to get a job that paid. And so I went to work for another cable network at the time. And interestingly, as we had children, the amount of money I made increased with each child. So amazing how that works. And I kind of pieced that together with my new faith outlook on life, because she wanted to stay home and raise the kids. And so she did, right? And we have 5 children. And so it takes a lot of faith to bring 5 children into the world and look at them every day and know that they're relying on you to feed them and clothe them and house them. They're still relying on me. The youngest is 20. He's at Baylor. And so, I'm not going to bore you with my whole career. I ended up doing the entrepreneur thing. I was on the management team of 2 venture-backed companies. One was the first company, believe it or not, 24 years ago, first company to put video over the internet. We raised $36 million in venture capital, and the market cratered the week we got that money. And so we didn't know the party was over, because we had $36 million in the bank, but it was over. And so did another venture-backed startup after that, and was on the board and on the management team. And, that one, 9/11, really, put the bullet in that one. Our Series A investor pulled out of our Series B round when 9/11 happened, and that really put the company into a tailspin. And so my wife said to me, she said, "How about if you don't do any more startups while I'm raising all these kids?" And so that was when I agreed, and I took a job with a big company. I had previously done a business development stint with PricewaterhouseCoopers, which was really successful. I increased total market share in my market by 33%. And so the lawyers who just launched Cooley's first East Coast office knew of me. I was their largest referral source, and they asked me to join their firm. And I had no idea I was going to be there for 20 years, but I was there for 20 years. And we saw extraordinary growth. Part of that was by opening up new offices, but the other part of that was me having a good team in place that executed in those offices. And so I had a 17-person team, and we had a really good run. I mean, we added $1.7 billion of annual revenue during that time. And I remember distinctly going into New York when we opened the New York office, going into the Boston office, and putting the person in place there. And it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. But after 20 years is long enough to do anything. And so I still had that entrepreneurial itch, and it decided, it was the point in time where I don't have necessarily 5 kids relying on me for everything. They rely on me for some, but yeah. I could take that step, and I'm doing that now, and I'm enjoying it, John.
Carl, when you talk about before a certain point in your life, you were an atheist, but then you hit a certain point or something happened and you found your life with and under God. What was it? Was it one event? Was it kind of a period in your life that kind of made you turn towards God? What was it?
It's kind of an interesting story if you want me to tell it. I mean,
Absolutely. Sure.
I wasn't looking for God. It's not like I was going and seeking him out. I was coming to the realization that the way I was living my life wasn't the best way to live my life. Right. When you don't have any guiding morals in your life, you do just whatever comes down. And that's what I did. And I did that, with the women in my life. And I don't need to go into the details, but use your imagination. And so I was, I got to the realization that, is this the best way to meet your future wife? Right. Trying to get a woman into bed and, right after meeting them. And I realized it wasn't. And this is not the right way to live my life. But the problem was, it's just like, the alcoholic trying to quit drinking, or the drug addict trying to quit drugs. I mean, it really was hard to leave that lifestyle on my own. And the realization really came when I was on an Army mission in Panama. We were the first unit. I don't know if you're old enough to remember when we invaded Panama back in the late 80s, early 90s, but we had just invaded Panama and took out Noriega, who was the president of Panama. And so all the units after that had to stay on the military posts. They weren't allowed to stay out in hotels in the community for obvious reasons. It was dangerous. And so we were the first unit to stay off of post in a hotel. So we were staying in the Caribe Hotel in Panama City. And my soldiers were heading out on the town that night. I was the only officer there, and there were no other officers to hang out with. So I said to the soldiers, I said, "What are you guys doing tonight?" And they said, "Well, sir, we're pursuing these prostitutes out front." And that didn't seem like a good idea. I'm trying to change my life, and prostitutes never seem like a good idea. And so I had two choices. Go with them or head back to the room. And there's actually a third choice. There's this guy named Wayne who was assigned to our unit for training that week. And he was from Mississippi. I said, "Wayne, what are you doing tonight?" And Wayne said, "I saw some lights out the window, and I think they're having a church service down there." So that was my third choice. Go with Wayne to check out a church service. And so that seemed like a better option than staying in my room or pursuing prostitutes. So I went with Wayne, not expecting anything at all. But John, I happened upon this very poor congregation of people, and I was looking at them, and I noticed that they had something I didn't have. They almost seemed to glow like they had this angelic glow. I couldn't figure it out. These people had no material possessions, and here I had everything, and they were happy and joyful, and I wasn't so happy. And so eventually we ended up in the church service standing next to these people, and everything was in Spanish, so I didn't understand a thing. Right? It's not like I could understand the preaching or even the singing. And as we're standing next to the congregation, the craziest thing happened. This wind blew. It came from where the congregation of people were, and it blew right through me. It wasn't a normal wind that would blow your clothes or what little bit of hair I had at the time. And I didn't know what had happened to me. I looked at Wayne. I said, "Wayne, did you feel that?" He goes, "Yes, I did." And so I saw there was a black gentleman there wearing a Navy hat. He looked like an American. I said, "Are you from America?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "What is this?" And he said, "It's kind of like a Baptist church in the U.S.," which meant absolutely nothing to me, right? And so I go back, and I'm ashamed to say I was really looking forward to returning to my lifestyle that I was trying to leave, and that lifestyle was sitting right in front of me, and for the first time ever, there was an open door, and I ran out the door, and I ran away from it, and all of a sudden I had this power over sin that I didn't have before. And I didn't know what was going on, John. This was all a mystery to me. But when I got back to graduate school at Indiana, all I knew is I needed to be in a church. And I didn't know what I was looking for. And I started going to two church services in the morning, 9 o'clock, 11 o'clock. And I don't know what I was looking for. But I happened into a place where the love the people had for each other was so overwhelming. I never experienced this kind of love before. The people were so nice. I had older people in the congregation making dinners for me. I had girls baking cookies for me. It was just, I can't explain it. It was just, I settled in there, and I started listening. And during this time, there was a woman who lived across the street from me. Her name was Ann, and she was a believer. And she would ask me things like, are you a believer? And I said, "Well, I have my doubts, and I didn't," but she would say things about her faith that I found interesting because she knew things I didn't know. She talked about praying. I knew nothing about praying. And she would talk about praying prostrate, like you lay down on the ground. I mean, it all seemed so strange to me. So one day, Anne and her atheist friend, Mandy, were standing there talking to me in the parking lot. And the second and only time this happened to me, John, that wind blew again right through me. And I said, "There it is. There it is." And Anne looked at me and she goes, "That is the Holy Spirit," which I didn't know what that was, John, but she did. And then what happened after that was really amazing. Mandy, the atheist woman, burst out crying hysterically, and the three of us hugged each other. And so both of these instances, there was somebody else there to validate this was happening. So
Yeah, it wasn't like you were.
I wasn't crazy. Yeah. I was imagining things, right? And so right after that, I was sitting in the back pew of the church, and the pastor said, quoting Jesus, he said, "He who acknowledges me before man, I will acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But he who disowns me before man, I will disown before my Father in heaven." I had never read the Bible, John. I didn't know anything about this, but all I knew was I needed to acknowledge him. So I don't know how I knew to do it, but I got up out of my seat and I walked to the front of the church. I said, "I need to acknowledge Jesus." And I was baptized that day. I was handed a copy of the New Testament, and I started to read it. And I literally felt like I was being turned inside out over the next several months. And so, I was a brand new believer, and it was all new to me. And all I know is that from the time that wind blew through me, I mean, I wasn't a perfect angel, John. I wasn't, but I did not have sex with a woman until I got married, and on my wedding night. I dated my now wife 3 years, and that is a change. And so, sorry to go through all that. I'm not sure if that's what you wanted to hear, but
Listen,
that's my
I like
story,
hearing
man.
all that stuff because that's part of who you are. That's part of who you are today. It doesn't play directly into your business, right? But it
Not at
plays
all.
indirectly into your business and how you do it, right? My question, so one question back, when you say that you felt the wind go through you, did you feel it inside you? Like you felt it wasn't like a strong wind that went, between your legs and around your body, but you felt something inside.
So I didn't find out until years later. I read over it, but I missed it. Well, this is appropriate. We're recording this right, kind of right in Easter week, so it's kind of interesting to be talking about
Yeah,
this, right?
that's true.
Because
True.
on Pentecost,
Yeah.
if you remember that, so that's when well, the disciples were sitting in the room, and a gushing wind came into the room. When the Holy Spirit came upon them, it was a gushing wind. So it's actually in the Bible. So I'm like, wow, it's actually in the Bible. I wasn't, freaking out. I mean, it actually, I describe it as a wind, but I don't know. I have no other word to describe it by. It was,
Just kind
it
of like
was,
a force of energy kind of going through you.
it went right through me. I've never felt anything like that before in my life. It's hard to explain, really.
Carl, and then you had to, was it military service? It was between undergrad and graduate. Was it during graduate you took a break to go into military? How did the military service come about?
So I joined ROTC in
Okay.
college. So I
Okay.
got a 3-year scholarship, and then I was commissioned as an Army reservist, and so I served. I was in 14 years, and I was in the National Guard and Reserve, and so it wasn't a full-time thing. Although now they activate soldiers. My son is also in the Army Reserve, was in the Guard, and he had to serve a year in Djibouti. I did go to Panama twice, Honduras once, but those were just 2-week missions. It wasn't like I left a job and did that. It was a great time. I mean, I really enjoyed my time in the military.
Carl, when you went into, you had started some of your own ventures and then went into venture backed work. How did you end up in that segment of business, in that segment of the economy?
Well, so all I knew about venture capital was what I studied in an
Yeah.
entrepreneurship class in grad school, right? And so I actually got a job when I left the television industry with the Fairfax County Economic Development Authority. Sounds boring, but for some reason I felt called to this job. This was back during the time where jobs were listed in the newspaper and you clipped information out. So I had been clipping out job postings for Fairfax County Economic Development Authority for years. And so I saw them in my folder. I applied for this job managing the capital attraction program for Fairfax County. So Fairfax County at the time was really where the internet was being formed, which is an interesting time to take this job because all the guts of the internet were right there outside of DC.
Mhm.
The internet service providers were there. Network Solutions was there. If you wanted a domain, you had to get it there. The wireless providers were there. And so it was a really interesting time to be promoting a county for venture capital because a month after I joined, New Enterprise Associates moved their headquarters into Reston, Virginia, which is right in the heart of Fairfax County, Virginia. So that was my calling card. And so my job was to stop the outflow of entrepreneurs moving to Silicon Valley and Boston,
Mhm.
and keep them there in Northern Virginia. And so I did that very successfully. I got to know all of the entrepreneurs that were raising money in Fairfax County, Virginia, and I kept them all there. And then I would go to Silicon Valley, New York, Boston, and I would tell the venture capitalists about what was happening in Northern Virginia. And we doubled the number of venture capital firms in Northern Virginia during that time, which was exciting. and it was it was a successful run in that job. That's when I got the call from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they said, "Hey, we're merging these two gigantic accounting firms, PricewaterhouseCoopers and Lybrand. We want you to come and be our face to the market." And I
Wow.
didn't. It's not anything I ever sought to do, but that was my introduction to business development, and I learned really quick, John, that no CEO wants to buy an audit. Nobody's interested. Everybody's going to
Yeah.
need one. They're all going to need one, but
Yeah.
nobody wants it. And so I was married to an auditor. That's all I knew about audits. And but I did find out that every entrepreneur either wants to raise money or they want introductions to potential customers. And that firm audited the biggest companies in the world and most of the venture capital funds. And so I became a super connector, connecting entrepreneurs to these folks. And by doing that, I became a very popular guy in the business community just by trying to help others. And that goes back to, I mean, you may not make the connection, but do to others as you have them do unto
Mm.
you, right? And I was helping people. I was helping people find jobs, helping people find money, helping venture capitalists find deals. And just by being a helpful guy, they all wanted to use our firm. And I want to say we added 85 new clients in a 2-year period doing that. It was an incredible run. And so I did that for 2 years. And then I joined that startup company I mentioned to you.
Wow, that's amazing. Um, Carl, the other question that I ask at this point in the conversation is, does it make sense from your childhood that this is what you're doing now? Because I'm always curious about the connection of what we're doing now to that our inner child, who we were, what we wanted, what we dreamt about. So how do you reconcile who you were as a kid to now?
It doesn't make sense as a child. Because I was a self-centered person who thought the whole world revolved around me and that everything on this earth was here to serve my needs. That was who I was as a kid. Um, I was really reborn at the age of 24, and from that birth forward, yes, absolutely, because all I've done my entire career is serve the needs of others and help others, and by doing that, I was incredibly successful at winning business to the firms I work for. I'm still doing it to this day for the firms I'm consulting for, and so it's worked really well. And so yeah, that's my story. I mean, it's an odd one, I know, but it's how it worked out.
No, I don't see it as odd. Um, I think for me, as long as someone takes great lessons about the randomness that may be their journey, I think that's what counts in the end. Um, like anything else in life, it's not like what happens to you, but how you react to it, how you respond, how you build off of it. So, yeah, I consider my own background a mishmash of different random components slapped together. But I mean, it all adds to who you are today. So, no, I think that's a great story. Carl, what does leadership mean to you, and what does great leadership look like? I think you kind of alluded to it in the last couple of minutes, but what's your take on leadership, what it means, and what it looks like?
I think servant leadership is key. And so I'll never forget when I first started reading the Bible, uh, it says, "He who wants to be first must be last and servant of all." And that one Bible verse just blew my mind. I was like, whoa, yeah, that's, yeah, I want to be first. Of course I want to be first. Aren't you first by, kind of nudging your way to the top? And that's not what it says. And so I had to really think about what that looks like. And I go back to my Army training. And so in
Mhm.
the Army, the officer doesn't go first when they eat. They actually go last. They make sure all of their soldiers are fed before they're fed. And if there's no food left over, you don't eat. And so there's always food left over, but that's how it works, right? And so if you apply that simple principle to everything you do, that's what leadership looks like. If you want your team to be successful, you got to take care of your team. And I've tried to do that. I'm not going to say I was perfect at it, but that's what I tried to do over the years that I led a team.
Yeah, I always love hearing about servant leadership. And there was one conversation I had, I don't know if it was out here or somewhere else, where somebody had said that I think servant leadership had come up in the conversation, and they said something like, no, they were done with that. They were I'm paraphrasing here, but they've been a people pleaser their entire life. They've always served others. They're done doing that. They're not going to serve anybody. And I think they kind of don't understand what it means, because I don't think when you are utilizing servant leadership or anytime you see it, I never see it as the traditional image you have of a servant, like that you can be fired, that you can be pushed out, that you're at the mercy of somebody else. I think in that conversation that I had, there was maybe a lot of fear, a lot of anger in that conversation, but I don't see servant leadership as being vulnerable to somebody else, or in a place of weakness or anything like that. I mean, I think it's to me, seeing the servant leaders that I've interviewed and talked to me, it's a point of strength, that you can look out for your men at eating time, make sure that they have everything they need, that you're facilitating the proper environment for the people you're working with, that you're providing services that your people need to get the job done right. Um, so yeah, I always try to clarify, not to you, obviously, because but just in conversations like this, that it's not about that traditional you're at the beck and call of anybody, but it's about the honor of really helping somebody and elevating them.
Yeah, so it doesn't come naturally because we're all selfish people, right? I mean, we're it's just the nature of the fleshy beings that we are. And so I have to remind myself when I get on a call or in a meeting, and my nature is to do what I think is going to be best for me. I have to remind myself. I have to constantly remind myself, this, don't do that. Do what has worked your whole career, right? I mean, so it's everything I write about in my book goes completely against human nature, and I think it's one of those things that kind of blows your mind because I mean, human nature is to try to get all we can for ourselves,
Oh
to
yeah.
amass as much as we can, to human nature is to lay in your bed and eat potato chips and drink a soda or a beer or whatever. I mean, that's human nature, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so everything I write about is going against that, right? That's not what I do with my life. I live the opposite of what would come naturally to me. And
Yeah,
so
we definitely have default settings as humans, just from millennia of, collecting as much food as we can because we don't know where that next meal is coming from. Securing shelter and security because we don't know what's going to happen, tomorrow. So even though we're living life today, I mean, all that millennia of programming is just kind of making sure that I'm all set. So you're right. That's a good point to make, is that that's our default setting. And life is about rising above that setting itself. So I appreciate that. Thank you. Carl, now we can jump into your book. You just referenced it a couple minutes ago, or alluded to it. Can you introduce the book and how you came to write it?
well, it's something that I knew I always wanted to do. I don't know if it's like you're doing this podcast, somehow that was in you to do this podcast. Right? I knew that I had a book in me. I didn't know exactly what it looked like. I thought it was going to be on how to do professional services business development, to be honest with you. I mean, because nobody ever taught that. When I would go and speak at my alma mater, I was amazed. There was one time I went and spoke to a class, and I didn't know I was speaking to the class, John. I thought I was literally going in to say hello and answer a few questions. And the professor turned me over to the class and turned the class over to me. And I had over an hour to speak to this class. And it was that really makes you think on your feet, right? So I started talking about what I did in my work because that's what I knew. And I was amazed at how many messages I got on LinkedIn from those students saying, "Wow, you're the most interesting speaker we've ever had. How do you get a job like you have? Like, how do you learn how to do this?" And so I realized that people were actually interested in this stuff. And so I thought I was going to write about that. But as I sat down to work on this, I realized that what works well in winning work to an accounting firm or a law firm also works in your personal life, right?
Mhm.
I mean, I have a wife who loves me. I have kids who love me. I have friends. I'm successful in my family and in the community as well. And so I really wanted to broaden that up to have a more holistic approach to living life. And so it's, in fact, when I first wrote the book, I still had a lot of the business stuff in there. My daughter got a hold of it, and it took me a year longer to write it because she said, "Dad, you got to get rid of all this business stuff. Do you want stay-at-home moms and retired people and students to read this book?" I said, "Of course." And she said, you gotta make it just more about people. And so it was a 3-year journey. And I really wanted to put together a book that was going to help people live a more abundant life. And so I've been inspired by books, beyond the Bible. I've read How to Win Friends and Influence People. Just a fabulous book. I mean, it really, it helped. It's like the Bible for human relations, right? And then there was,
Yeah.
it's probably the best book I've read. And then, Go Giver that made me cry, because it was a book that was, I realized the guy who was being referenced throughout the book was operated like me in the business world. And there was another one called Rainmakers that I read. And, there were certain books that just touch you and move you. And I wanted to do kind of a next generation, how to win friends and influence people, but not so much on just human relations, on starting with the inner person and working your way out. And so, I address things like finding your purpose. Right? You asked me, if what I was doing throughout most of my career, 25 years, was what I sought to do as a kid. Well, no, I mean, it came from a phone call. I got a phone call from an accounting firm asking me if I wanted to do something. And I actually, my first instinct was, no, I don't really want to do that. And if I hadn't been open to listening to them saying that we think you can do this, I would have never stepped into my purpose. And most of my career has been professional services, business development. And so sometimes you have to listen to people who and respect. And so that's one of the ways of finding your purpose. And another example I mentioned in the book is I get up and speak in front of large crowds of people now. When I was young, I was terrified to speak in public. I mean, the thought of standing up in front of a group just I would shake and be nervous. And
I only laugh because I was an introvert when I was a kid. And not only that, but lacked confidence and was shy. And people may see the three things as interchangeable, but they're very different. I wrote about it in a book a couple of years ago. My quiet, like the triad of quiet. In any case, I can relate because as terrified as I used to be in public speaking class and talking in front of anybody, now I jump at the chance. Now it doesn't matter how big the audience is. And I think it has a lot to do with what you just referenced a minute ago about finding your inner self. So if you put me on a stage when I was younger and I didn't know my purpose, I didn't know what I was about, and you wanted me to talk to somebody, it's like your armor's not there. But then when you understand yourself, you know what you're about, you have this purpose, you have this value that you want to share with people, it kind of takes like all that fear away. It's interesting how that works.
Yeah, and it was, so once again, I'm not saying listen to everybody. You got to listen to people and respect. And when I'd get up and speak, and people would say, "Oh, you were good." Like, "Oh, I was," I didn't know I was good. I can't stand to hear myself speak, but when people were telling you you're good, and then I remember when I was asked to give a message at my church. Talk about a terrifying thing to do. I mean, standing in front of a church, right? This is serious. It's not just a business group. It's
My community.
Yeah. So when I did that, and I had a number of people tell me it was good, I'm like, oh, okay, And so that was one of my purposes that I needed to have validated, because in myself, I didn't know that I had that in me, right? And so another thing I address in the book is maintaining a sound mind. So many people go through life, and I did this most of my life, John, where you just dwell on whatever thought comes into your mind. And let's admit it, we can be pretty negative people. We can be pretty hard on ourselves. We can look in the mirror and say negative things to ourselves. And what you think controls what you say, and what you say controls your life. I mean, it's amazing how you can give life to words. And then they, I don't even want to give examples of the bad things we could say about ourselves. Reap what I sow there, And so maintaining a sound mind is, and I give some examples of things that I do to replace thoughts, negative thoughts and lies with truths. And so I also talk about growing spiritually. I preface that chapter with, if you're not interested in this, skip it, because not everybody's going to want to do that, but who knows, maybe they'll come back to it later in life and read that chapter. And I tell the story that I told to you, and I go a little deeper on that. Maintaining a healthy body. That's a chapter I had to edit to make it palatable to the general audience, because I'm kind of a fitness nut. Most people are not going to get up in the morning and do cardio, walk on a treadmill desk 10 miles a day, and then go to the gym at night. I do that. Right. And so my daughter said, Dad, nobody's going to do that. or eat like I eat. And so I break it down just to the bare bones of how to know how many calories you're burning in a day and how much you're consuming in a day, and ways to modify both ends of that spectrum, so that. Go ahead.
Carl, before you give away the store though of the stuff in it, I'm curious, how did you, just the title about the abundant life, how did you come to just using that as the title? How did you decide on that? What's the story behind that?
Well, since I told you my story of coming to faith, I guess this is not going to seem so weird to you. I had what I think was the Omicron variant of COVID. I was just wiped out for 3 weeks, where I just didn't have enough energy to even send an email. It was horrible. And so I had a meeting with, I had hired a publishing company, Leaders Press, to help me put this book together. I had written a bunch, and I just needed somebody who knew how to take what I had done and turn it into a book. And so they outline it with you and all that. And that morning, I remember praying, like, it was a prayer, like, God, just give me the energy to be able to have this meeting. I can't even think, and that morning I woke up, and, I guess in the natural, you could say I got better and I had a burst of energy. I would like to think that God answered my prayer, and that morning I got the inspiration to put this together. And that morning, clear as day, the title came to me and the outline of the book came to me. And when I sat down to have that meeting, it was perfect. And it's hard to, put that into words, but that's really what happened. And up until that morning, I didn't have the title, and I didn't really have the outline. And I got it that day. We tweaked it a little bit here and there.
Yeah, but the bones were there.
Yeah.
Carl, when it comes to the laying out the chapters, so what is that path? You mentioned a couple stories, you mentioned a couple chapters. So how did you want to, obviously you mentioned the outline kind of came to you. Can you go through it? What's the kind of path that you take the reader on as they go through your book? Just a couple.
So, sure.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's broken into two parts, and then chapters in each of those parts. So the first one is abundance in yourself and at home. And then the second part is abundance in the community and in the marketplace. And so in yourself and at home, purpose, sound mind, spiritually healthy body, personal growth, developing and maintaining relationships, and establishing boundaries. And then in the community and in the marketplace, being likable, developing character and leaving a legacy, being part of a community, and then mindset matters. And then I conclude it. That's the outline.
What you mentioned boundaries. Can you speak to that? I'm especially curious about that, just because looking at it from a servant leadership role, I like that there seems to be clarity in saying, we're going to serve, but at the same time, there have to be boundaries. Can you speak a little to that portion of it?
Yeah. So when I go out to train people to do business development, I'm taking somebody who's already busy, and somebody who's a practicing attorney or investment bank or accountant, and they're already billing a bunch of hours, and I'm going to come and ask them to go spend extra time doing business development work. Well, before I even get into that topic, I do the boundaries, right? Because you've got to know what's important to you in life, and you've got to protect it. And so my number one in my life is my faith. Number two is my family. Number three is my health. And so then comes my work. And so I have to make time for these first three, or they will be taken away from me. When you put yourself out as somebody who's helpful and willing to help others, your work and people in the community, they will take 100% of your time, 365 days a year. They'll take all of your time. And so you have to limit when you're available. So John, if I sent you my Calendly link to get on my calendar, you'll see that the options are very few, because I protect days for follow-up. I protect time for stuff that's important to me. So to do that, I work as hard or harder than the next guy, but I get up very early in the morning, and I'm not allowed to wake my wife up until 5 a.m., but I'm up before then.
Until 5 a.m. What time do you wake up?
It depends. I don't set an alarm. I just wake up naturally. So it depends on the day. I don't even want to talk about what time. People think I'm nuts. I just wake up. I wake up when I wake up, and I
get going.
I spend some time. Well, I spend some time by myself and drink my coffee. I sit I have a infrared sauna. If I wake up early enough, I sit in there. And I stop listening to I used to listen to podcasts. I try to get quiet, and I try to just have clarity of thought when I get up in the morning. And if God's speaking to me, I want to hear what he has to say, or I just get clarity in my own thoughts. Sometimes I write some notes down, and it's the only time that I really have a clear mind. And so I wake my wife up at 5 a.m. We do a Bible study together. We spend about an hour together. And so that's really my family time too. I used to have to carve out other time for family, but my family is largely grown now. And so putting my faith first, and then I go to the gym. So I'm knocking out that workout before I start my work, and then I come back and I start the work day. And so I block out those times on my calendar. My phone is not on. I mean, it's on, but it's on do not disturb because I'm not taking calls during that time. And now that I've got these international contacts, I mean, the people in other countries all hours, right? And so I just have to limit when I'm available. And you have to do that. You have to, if you want to be effective in so for what I do, and I don't know your listeners what they do, but when you do sales or business development, you need to schedule time to follow up. And so I'm out in the community. For every hour I'm out in the community, I need an hour of follow-up time, because if I just meet you and I never follow up with you, nothing's going to happen. If I meet you and something's going to happen from this relationship, I'm going to say, John, you're a leadership, you're a performance coach. What are the kind of clients that would be helpful to you? Oh, I know somebody who could benefit from what you do, oh, you host a podcast. I know another guy who wrote a book that would make an interesting guest. I would write down things that I'm going to do to follow up with you, because I want to add value to you as this new contact of mine. And so in order to do that, I need time to do that, right? Or else it's just I know it's going to happen. If I don't schedule that time, that business card is going to end up in a pile of business cards, and it's just not going to
falls through the cracks.
Yeah, that's right. And so you have to set boundaries so you have time to follow up. And typically I block Mondays and Fridays. So I have outreach time and follow-up time. It's just what works for me. It could be hours in the day that you schedule to do that.
Gotcha. Carl, I'm curious, have there been in feedback you've gotten about your book, have there been any particular areas that have resonated most with the readers? Ones that you always hear maybe garnered the most aha moments or most wake-up calls for the readers? Are there any parts that stand out that you hear the most feedback about at all?
Interestingly, there's at the end of each chapter, I've got some practical exercises, some bullet points of things you can do to put what you just learned into practice. And I didn't think that was such a big deal. In fact, to be honest with you, John, when I wrote this thing, I didn't know that anybody would ever read it or even care, right? I mean, you don't know, right? You're kind of inside your own head putting this thing together. And I've been really pleasantly surprised that people have found these little things helpful, and they've actually wrote it in Amazon reviews. I think the thing that's surprised me the most is when I was at a business event yesterday, and a young woman came up to me who I hardly know, and she said, "I got your book," or somebody else. I emailed a guy I met in 2008. I wanted to get a meeting with his business, and it's forever ago I met this guy, right? And I sent him an email, tried to warm it up as best I could, and he said, "Carl, I love your book." It's just or I went all the way to Saudi Arabia, and I met a government official over there, and he said, "Carl Grant III, I'm reading your book." That's wild, man. It's just wild, because that means that man knows, like, really knows me, right? Because
Yeah,
I pour
because of
my
the
life
stories,
into this
everything.
book.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so he feels connected to me, and me to him, and he actually came and brought me a book for my daughter, who I write about in the book. I mean, it's just really moving little things like that. And I've had friends read it, and even though we're friends and we know each other, for some reason they don't know all these things that I put in my book, and they were moved uh, by the book too. It's being helpful to people and in ways that I didn't really, I hoped it would be, but I didn't really know it would be. And so it's been really a good experience.
Yeah, it's amazing when I talk to authors and they have when they get feedback from their um, friends and family that were there for certain stories that are covered in the book, but they were there seeing it from the outside. They didn't really know what the person was going through on the inside. So they saw resilience on the outside, but they didn't know the fight that it was on the inside for that person. So it's always amazing when I hear authors getting notes or feedback or comments from their friends because you write a book like this, it really opens you up to your friends. And it's not that you didn't trust them and that's why you didn't share any of this with them. I mean, from what I've seen from my authors here, it's really an exercise in self-reflection where maybe before you started writing the book, you didn't know some of these major points that were coming in. You didn't see it a certain way. Maybe and that's one of my questions coming up. Um, you didn't think that was going to happen. You start the exercise and you go deeper and deeper and find nuggets for yourself. I mean, it's an exploration in the self.
It is. And I'll tell you, I've already told you I'm not perfect, right? I mean, we've established that we're not perfect people. And so some of what I write in the book is stuff that I know is right. And do I always practice it perfectly? No. I mean, I don't practice anything perfectly, but I know this is the way this works. And so when you have your own children who read your book and call you call you on stuff, I mean, Dad, in your book it says this, and I'm like, thanks for reminding me.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
But I mean, that's the full person. I think it's unfortunate because you realize that a lot of people we don't express to each other what we're really thinking about our own lives or what we think about them. It's just the whole thing like when somebody passes away, unfortunately, where it's like, oh, this is what they meant to me. Or, this is what they meant to my life. This is what they did for me. They were so important and this and that. And it's one of those things where you don't hear about that until the person's gone. So there's something to be said about sharing these things, your inner workings, your inner lessons, your history, for better or worse, what makes you who you are today. So I appreciate everything you've shared here today. And this is the other question that I typically ask my authors, Carl, is in writing it, what lessons? That's why I was kind of leading with the other question. What did you learn about yourself? What did you take away in writing and putting out the book? You said you weren't sure if anybody was going to read it. Um, but once it was done, once it was out there, how did you, in just reflecting on your life and all the material, the stories, the experiences in there, did something change in you? Did something evolve in you? How did you evolve? How did you change based on putting this book out there?
Well, so when you start out doing something like this, this was, think about it. It was over 3 years ago. I started this out. I had no idea even then that I was going to be leaving my job and embarking on a new life. And so much has happened since I've written the book. I now have been to the Middle East 4 times, and I'm going back. And so there's some relevance to this answer, John.
Yeah.
I put it together, and I wrote about some things in the book. I mean, so when I came to faith, I didn't just read the Bible; I read the Quran as well. And there's not too many people in the world that have read both. You find that, a lot of people we found a few in the United States that have read both, and there's a few in the Middle East that have read both, but very few. And so I wrote about that in my book, and I didn't realize when I was writing it that I would be traveling to the Middle East and doing business over there and being
Mhm.
asked to speak over there. And interestingly, the book has opened up a dialogue between the West and the East in ways that I never I never dreamt it would. And so I actually have been asked to go and speak over there and to talk about the topics in the book and actually speak on cultural similarities and differences. And then I was asked back and challenged to speak on religious similarities and differences. And it's really opened up a whole world to me that I couldn't have ever imagined delving into. And there seems to be a real hunger in that part of the world about understanding. And you know, I mean, if you've read both books, you realize there's about 90% overlap between the two books. And most people don't know that. Most people don't know that. Most people don't know that in Islam, that they believe that Jesus was the Messiah and that he's coming back. Most people don't know that. I know that because I read the book. And so when they disagree on like who he was to your own personal life. I mean, they don't believe that. They don't celebrate Easter over there, put it that way, right?
Yeah.
But when you come into that part of the world and when you've written a book and people have read it and they understand where you've come from and they understand that you understand them, they want to talk to you about these things. It's amazing how people come and I'm genuinely interested in their practices and their beliefs and their culture. And when you're open like that and you listen to them, it opens up doors for you to share back with them. And it's really been a wonderful experience. And I've developed some really quality friendships over there based on mutual understanding.
That's amazing. That's amazing just because obviously in this world, it's, you know, there's a lot of fear in the world. So it's, you know, my politics, my religion, my community, my society, my experience against yours. There isn't much room in the middle for here, this is what I'm about. What are you about? You know, again, it goes back to fear. You don't want to take the time to learn about the person sitting next to you or across the hall or across the state, across the country. So I can't applaud that enough. I think we need more of that, especially as an extremely religious person, Carl. It's amazing that you have that devotion to God and the Bible, but that you're still open enough to learn about the Quran and their religion. And it's just that's an amazing example because you don't see that too often.
Well, you've got the Book Leads podcast. I mean, it's amazing what happens when you open up a book and read it, right? I mean,
It's
you just,
incredible.
I'm glad I did it. I think it happened when the world started to get crazy, and I wanted to know what the other half of the world believed, and because I didn't know what they believed, and I literally couldn't put it down. I went on vacation and I started reading the Quran. People look at me like I'm nuts. Like, what are you doing? I said, I want to know what it says. Like, this is important to me. I almost finished it in a week. Can I tell you one other story since you brought up politics?
Absolutely.
One other story that I tell in the book, and so I don't, you know, this might inspire somebody to want to go read it. I talk about having friends that are different than you, being open to people who are different faiths, different orientations, different politics. And I'll tell you a story. When I was younger, I was politically involved. I'm not going to get into what the politics were, but I was at the polls representing one of the political parties, handing out the voter guides. And there was a gentleman there who was there for the other political party. And I knew who he was. We didn't know each other, but I knew of this man. And while we were standing there handing out this literature, we became friends. And he invited. Well, he asked me if my son wanted to work on his farm. He had a sheep farm and a winery, like a vineyard and stuff. And so my son went to work for him at the age of 12. And he this guy was a real gentleman. He said, "Carl, do you mind if I try to indoctrinate your boy?" And I said, his name was Malcolm. He's passed away now. Malcolm Baldwin. He was a wonderful man. I said, "Malcolm, I've had 12 years with this boy." I said, "Take your best shot. Take your best shot." And I said to my son, I said, "You know what? You better know why you believe what you believe, because Malcolm is a brilliant man. He's an environmental attorney. He's a smart guy, and he's going to have real reasons why he believes, he was into evolution and all this stuff." And so I said, when you get to talking to him, I said, I want you to figure out, you're never going to be good at arguing your point of view until you can argue the other guy's point of view just as well as you would argue your side. So just remember that this was probably the best learning experience my son ever had. Malcolm started in my son's no pushover. I mean, they had wonderful conversations. I think he kept my son working there from 12 to 18 just so they could talk for all this time, right? I don't know how much work they were getting done. And then Malcolm came to me. He said, "Do you mind if I introduce your son to Origin of the Species?" I said, "Not at all." I said, "I'll buy him the book." And so it's not something I taught in my home. We taught creation, and but this would be good for him to know. I said, "You better know why you believe what you believe, and know why they believe what they believe." And that was an amazing experience. And he didn't convince my son to change his mind, but boy, did they have an understanding of each other at the end of that. The friendship was so good. We were never on the same political side, except for one issue. There was one issue. They were going to. I lived in a neighborhood where we had like 180 acres or 200 acres or something, and there was 18 home sites. So it was a lot of land, and there was an electric line that went through the middle of the property. It had been there before we all got there, so it didn't really bother anybody. But the electric company bought up a bunch of the properties and was going to expand that electrical line, some ugly, cut down all the trees, and I didn't want that to happen because it was going to ruin my property value. And Malcolm didn't want it to happen because it was going to endanger some owl species. It wasn't the same reason, but we both opposed that electric line coming through there like that. And so we were now on the same side of an issue. And you know what? It was great because we won. We won. We beat the power company. And so, I mean, had we not been friends, we wouldn't have worked together like that. And he ended up being the keynote speaker at my son's Eagle Scout ceremony.
Oh, wow.
I mean, and I went to the man's funeral, and man, I cried because he was a great guy, and so polar opposite politically, but a dear friend.
Yeah, and I think that one-on-one communication, the one-on-one talking is what we don't have anymore. For the most part, the political stuff is like you're listening to talking heads on TV that just want to throw off the other side, but you rarely see a conversation where that I think would demonstrate that most people on both sides have more in common in terms of humanity, curiosity, respect, courtesy. What counts the most, right? What makes the solid foundation for everything else, the politics. I think that one-on-one conversation you had with him, look at that relationship that started. And unfortunately, I think we're so used to hiding behind keyboards, hiding behind cameras, in certain instances, that I think we've lost that ability to just kind of debate, with that courtesy, with that respect. So thank you for sharing that story.
We never debated. You know what? We never debated about anything. We agreed to disagree, and we
even if you just say that we don't agree, that doesn't mean we can't be friends. Doesn't mean we can't be friendly. Doesn't mean we can't share, family experiences and whatnot.
Yeah. So Austin, Texas is an interesting place. We've got Texas is it's a giant red state with a bright blue dot in the middle. So you get in Austin, Texas, you get an interesting mix of politics, and we all have to get along here because it's the state capital, and we've got a conservative governor and a very, very left-wing city council. And so it's really interesting. I mean, it's an interesting place to be. I mean, it's and there's checks and balances everywhere. The city council will want to defund the police, but the governor will say, no, we're bringing in the state police. I mean, it's an interesting place to be. And so I practice what I preach in my book, every day in the business community. I have to. If you didn't, it's just this crazy politics in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, Austin's on my bucket list to get to, especially like South by Southwest. Anything with music, obviously barbecue. I'm all for too. I'm big into the food, so it's on my list to get down there.
Carl, moved me to Texas. South by Southwest moved me here. I started going here, and I'd never been to Austin before, and went here, over a decade, and brought my wife once, and she said, "Let's do this."
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's beautiful.
Be careful visiting Austin, especially at South by Southwest. You come out of that cold and
I know
78-degree weather. It'll charm you away.
Yeah, especially coming from Connecticut, it might change my mind. Carl, what's I know the book just came out. I think it was tail end of 23. And this you started writing this during COVID or was it before COVID, Carl?
I started way before because
Okay.
I had been putting pieces together, but I was earnest at like turning it into a book during COVID.
Okay. So I know the book just finally came out end of 2023, December, I believe. I know it's kind of quick to ask you this, but what do you see for the future of your writing? What do you want to get to next? Even if it's a general idea of a direction you want to head in, what are you thinking?
I it was such a Herculean effort to put this thing together. I'm taking a rest right now, and I'm gonna kind of bask in the glory of having this thing done. It's
Yeah.
never done, John. As soon as you think it's done, then you're promoting it. The audio book hasn't come out yet. I mean, that's about to come out, and I had to finish that. That's a Herculean effort. I read it myself, and then they come back to you and they tell you how many times you messed up and you have to re-record it. And so I'm gonna lay low on this. I think it's amazing. I've already started on outlines for additional things, but I'm not. I gotta check myself. I
All
gotta
right, just I'm not asking to see a draft of a next book, but what topics would you be thinking?
I think uh, along the lines of abundance. I think it really has resonated with people, and so I could see abundance in business. I can see some more faith-based focus on this. But the book I put out is a smattering of everything in one's life, right? It's all about your life. But I could see really boiling this down into different subtopics at some point. I could see,
Awesome.
how there, there there's certain books. Who's the guy that he was the pastor who wrote the book? Rick in California. I'm forgetting the name. I can't remember, but that thing came out, and was it no? It was Joel Osteen did Your Best Life Now, and then there was I'm blanking on the name, but it was a good book, and he had all these offshoots of that book because it was such a good book. I could see some offshoots like his. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name. It'll
No,
come
it's
to
all
me as
right.
soon as I stop thinking about it.
No, it's all right. If you happen to remember, just shoot me an email. I'll include it with all the notes for this episode. Carl, in starting to wrap up, what lessons do you hope people take away from your book? Like how would you kind of narrow down the message if you wanted to convince somebody of the value of the book, the power of your book? What do you want people to take away?
I think everybody's going to take something different from this. I read a book called The 4 Hour Body by Tim Ferriss. I don't know if you read it. It's bigger than the Bible, and it had a lot of nonsense in that book, but it changed my life. I
Mm,
had so I'm giving you this example to give you an example of what hope people will do with this book. I tried everything he said in that book, like ice baths and all these crazy things, and there's one thing I had I'm a I was eating a low carb diet for 10 years, and it just stopped working for me. My body got used to it, and I was really sad. I mean, I had given up on the diet, and I started reading that book, and he wrote about the notion of a cheat day,
mm.
and that changed my life. I now on Saturdays I have a cheat day, right? I can eat guilt free whatever I want to eat, pizza, ice cream, you name it, and carrot cake, and so I do that, and you know what? That one thing changed. Now my body doesn't get used to that low carb diet, and so I look forward to my Saturdays like you wouldn't believe. It's 2 days away. I can't wait. I got a pizza waiting for me, and so I think in
Yeah.
this book everybody's going to read it, and there's going to be the cheat day moment. I even write about cheat day in the book, but it could be, I talk about setting goals for yourself, and that could be one of the things that people take, like goals that seem impossible. When I was a kid, I wanted to fly airplanes. I didn't know anybody who flew airplanes. I mean, it seemed like an impossible thing. How do you fly an airplane? And I talked about how I set up steps. It took me 20 years to get my pilot's license, but I did it, right? I wanted to write a book, and it seemed like an impossible thing. I got some help, and I did it, but it took setting achievable steps to do that. That's one of the things. It could be in the relationship realm. It could be in the spiritual realm, right? It could be just that mindset. I don't know where everybody is in life, but there's something there
Mm.
for everybody. And I think everybody who reads this book will have that cheat day moment I had with Tim Ferriss's book.
That one thing that will just make it click. Carl, wrapping up, is there anything that you want to share? What are you up to these days? What do you want to share with this audience? Anything that I might not have touched upon or asked about?
I am just trying to live the best life I can. And I think everybody wants to do that. And I think, taking to, I talked to a guy the other day who was working 24/7, 7 days a week. And he was really reached out to me, kind of a cry out for help because his life wasn't going the way he wanted to. He had fired from a job. And I said, you know what, you need to take a rest day, a day of rest. I mean, heck, in the Bible says God rested on the seventh day. I'm like, dude, you got to take a day of rest. And why don't you there's a cheap Kindle version of the book. I said, get my book and just sit down on a day, Saturday, if it works or whatever, and just don't just stay in your bed and read the book. And I hope he does it, because I think entering that state of rest and kind of changing his mindset could help him. And I hope everybody does that. I'm trying to do that. I'm purposely taking Saturdays and just not doing everything that I have had to do. Right. And so that's my takeaway. Work hard, but rest.
Yeah. I think, not like you need another thing on your plate, because we just talked about getting things off your plate, but I think people would benefit from, some kind of accountability group, especially men. Just we tend to be a little more closed off, kind of tend to want to do it ourselves to prove ourselves, generalizing, of course, not every guy is the same. But there is something to be said about an accountability group where if you in your community don't have somebody like that, or in your circles, I could see the value of hearing somebody else's stories in a group that meets regularly to share those experiences, to share the results, to share the push. It's amazing. I've spoken to fathers where they had a tough time during the pandemic, kind of that traditional feeling of the father and being able to protect the family, control what's predictable, trying to deliver and keep your family secure. And during the pandemic, I mean, that wasn't the case for anybody. Everything was so unpredictable. So I could see the value in just accountability and having a community that thinks much in that same fashion. And the great thing is, as much as you are a man of God and religion, you're right. I mean, whatever it is you believe in, fine, but tap into that to get your clarity, to move up, to move forward. So I appreciate everything you shared here, Carl.
I couldn't agree more, John. I address being part of a community in the book. It's vital. It's vital. We're not meant to be lone rangers. We're meant to live in community.
Absolutely. So again, Carl's book is How to Live the Abundant Life. Carl, thank you so much for the nuggets, the wisdom, the stories, everything you provided. It's been fun. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thanks, John. Really enjoyed it.
And to everyone else, if there's anything that I might have missed, limited on time, there's so many rabbit holes that I could have dragged Carl down to get more clarity and ask more questions. But if you have anything that I might not have asked, think of ideas that I should have brought up, please let me know. I'll reach out to Carl, see what kind of insights, knowledge, wisdom I can get back, anything that he might be able to share. But in the meantime, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.